Good day, everybody. Today I want to show you 10 myths that most Christians believe about Jesus' birth that is not true and was passed on to them by popular ideas, or maybe they heard it from their parents or at church, but it's simply not true. Now, before you get a little bit uncomfortable here, I'm not going to go on and deny the virgin birth or that Jesus is the Son of God. I do believe that, and you should too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 10 inaccuracies about Jesus' birth account, the nativity story, that's not true and that people told you maybe. And I really hope that this will help you so that you can communicate the birth of Jesus to someone else more accurately, so they will not start to doubt the truth and the significance about Jesus' birth and coming when they realize that these things that maybe they've encountered was not historically or biblically accurate. And so without further ado, let me now take you through 10 myths about Jesus' birth that most Christians believe. Come on. Good day and welcome to Books of the Wise, where we talk theology, great books, and the Bible. Now let me start by reading to you an explanation of Christ's birth account that most people have heard and believe, and see if you can spot the 10 inaccuracies in this paragraph. Okay, I'm going to read. In the year 0 AD, on 25 December, before Joseph and Mary were married, Jesus was born in a barn of a guest house. On that same night, 3 wise men were led to the barn by a star, where they also saw baby Jesus, his parents, and the shepherds. Did you spot any inaccuracies there? Actually, there were 10 inaccuracies there, and I want to take you through them right now. So the first inaccuracy is that Jesus was born on 25 December, the day on which we celebrate Christmas. We possibly celebrate Christmas actually on 25 December because there was a Roman holiday known as Saturnalia near 25 December when Christians had off work to worship. And this is a little bit hard to trace through history to be precise, but Mike Winger, another Christian YouTuber, made an excellent video on why we celebrate Christmas on 25 December. And I'm going to make a link to that in the description box below so you can check it out after this video. But Jesus was probably not born on 25 December, but was probably born between 1 February and 31 April. Their springtime, because that was the time of the year when shepherds would have been watching their flocks by night because lambs might be born. And we know from Luke 2 verse 8, and this is part of the Christmas story, that shepherds were there when Jesus was born. And so that's true. Shepherds were there when Jesus was born. And so it's probably springtime, the time of the year when Jesus was born. Probably not 25 December. Not that there is anything wrong with celebrating Christmas on 25 December. I'm not saying that as well. A second myth that we believe about Jesus' birth was that Jesus was born in the year 0, right? 0 AD or 0 BC, whatever you would call it. But actually, there was no year 0. The calendar goes straight over from 1 BC to 1 AD. And also, there was a historical mistake in the year that Jesus was born. A calendrical confusion that was caused by the switch from a Roman to a Christian calendar in the 6th century AD, based on the faulty calculations of Dionysius exegetes, who did not have accurate information about Herod the Great's birth. According to reliable historical evidence, Herod the Great died in 4 BC. Thus, if Jesus was about 2 years old or so when Herod died, and Herod was still alive by the time that Jesus was born, remember he ordered to kill all the baby boys, then Jesus was born around 5-6 BC. And there's Herod the Great's death was very well-known historical event because of he was a king, and that he built great things, and even the year that he died, the Qumran community came out of hiding. So his death, a very big thing and historically known that he died in 4 BC. A third myth about Jesus is that Joseph and Mary was not married when Jesus was born. Okay, so that's the myth. But if you would look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 18, it says, "Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way when his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph." Betrothed. Now that's a very interesting word, betrothed. What does this mean? Well, the word betrothed was actually already the first start a step of getting married. They were already in this first stage of being married. The New Greek International Commentary says, quote, "The Old Testament law treated betrothal as creating a legal state of marriage with attendant possibilities of adultery, divorce, and widowhood. Despite this, during the betrothal, the wife continued to be the responsibility of her father for a maximum of 12 months, provided she had reached puberty prior to the marriage ceremony. In this interim period, sexual relationships were not considered proper, though no doubt they did at times occur." Unquote. Also, the Pillar New Testament commentary says, quote, "To break a betrothal, divorce proceedings were necessary. It is a firm commitment normally undertaken a year before marriage. During that year, the girl remained with her own family, but the tie established was a strong one and was really the first part of marriage. A betrothed woman could be punished as an adulteress, according to Deuteronomy 22, verse 23 and 24. And the punishment of a virgin who is not betrothed was different than a betrothed lady. The second part took place when the man took the wife to his home, according to Deuteronomy 22, verse 20, and Deuteronomy 25, verse 1 to 13." Unquote. Thus, we see that Joseph and Mary to be betrothed was not something that we do in our modern day, but was something that the Jews did and that the Old Testament law made even rules on and made provision for. It was more than just being engaged. The new family was already instantiated since they were declared married, but they were not yet allowed to stay with your wife for a short period of time until the house and other things were fully ready. Then, within a maximum of a year or sooner, when everything was ready, the husband would bring the wife into his home. And we even see here in the Matthew chapter 1 that Joseph was considering to divorce her. So just showing they were more than just engaged. They were already married, although they did not yet have sexual relationships. That part of the marriage did not yet take place. Now, a fourth myth about Jesus' birth is that Jesus was born in a barn of a guest house or of a barn of an inn, or however you've heard it. But it is unlikely that Joseph would stay in a barn for any long amount of time, especially if his wife was still pregnant, and it seems unlikely that Mary gave birth as soon as they reached Bethlehem, as the story goes, right? The nativity story, they just arrived at Bethlehem, they couldn't find a house at that very moment to stay in, and then they just found a barn, and then immediately she gave birth. That's very, very unlikely that all those things would have happened just like that. Now, if you go to Luke chapter 2, verse 7, we find these words that it says, "And she gave birth to her firstborn son," talking about Mary giving birth to Jesus, "and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn." Okay, so that seems like, wow, that really talks about there was no place for him in the inn, so they laid him in a manger of a barn, right? Presumably it must have been a barn because there was a manger right there. But the word here for inn or guest house, right? Some translations can also be translated as a guest room. For example, in Luke chapter 22, verse 11, where they celebrated Jesus instantiated the Lord's Supper, right? The teacher said to you, "Where is the guest room?" So that's the same word there. guest room. And so you could translate it as this commercial guest house where travelers would, stay for the night. But it's also just like a guest room of a house. Okay. And so the typical Israeli home would have only one room, and then one guest room, and then also a lower room where the animals would stay. But when the guests would come and the guest room was full, they would let the animals sleep outside and let those guests as well sleep in the lower room, in the animal room. And it's unlikely that a small town like Bethlehem would actually have a guest house. Very, very small town. More likely then they would stay in the lower room where the animals would normally stay and then go outside. And that's why there was also a manger. In Luke chapter 10, verse 34, you know the story of the Good Samaritan. Here we find another word for a guest house in this account of the Good Samaritan, where another word is used here for the inn of the Good Samaritan, and that referred to this commercial guest house. So another word for commercial guest house, but the one that we find in Luke is used as a normal guest room in Luke 22 verse 11, like we just said. So even there, with consistency of words, the argument lays more in favor of just the lower Israeli room. And like I said, historically, that there were all the houses, or most of the houses, had that lower room, had a guest room and a lower room. And then the lower room is most probably where Mary gave birth to baby Jesus. Now, since Joseph probably had family in Bethlehem. Remember, they came to Bethlehem. Why? Because he was born there, because of the census, right? He had to go there. So Joseph most probably had family and friends in Bethlehem. That's probably where he grew up as well, right? And so most likely he had some accommodation, right? And so he wouldn't even have to try to stay in this guest house or this inn. And also another question is, if you go to Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, note here, and going into the house, they're talking about the wise men, right? Going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. And most probably that was the same house that Jesus was born in, right? So there was a house. If it was not a house, why didn't they stay there the previous time, right? So there was a house, and most probably this is the same house that they gave birth in. Just in this account, it was not the lower room, but probably the guest room. Okay, so that I hope that brings some clarity. And by the way, if you are finding value from this, please leave us a like and tell us if there are some areas where you disagree with us or some other myths that Christians believe concerning the birth of Jesus. Now, here's another a myth that some people believe about Christmas, most people, or a lot of people at least, and that is that there were three wise men. And by the way, this is the fifth myth. Three wise men. How do we know that there were three wise men? Well, we do know that they brought him three gifts, right? The same verse in Matthew chapter 2, verse 11. We see here, then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And so they say, yeah, sure, three gifts. So there were three wise men, but that's not, there might have been three wise men, but that's not evidence, right? There might have been a lot of wise men. Most probably there were a lot of wise men, because Matthew chapter 2 verse 2 tells us that when these, verse 1, sorry, that they came from the east and they asked concerning Jesus. And, verse 3, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled and all Jerusalem with him. So imagine this group of people troubling the whole of Jerusalem and even the king. So most probably there was a large group of people with bodyguards traveling with them. Remember, they had expensive gifts. And so most probably a bigger group to really show a lot of honor to this king, as was custom practice in the ancient Near East. Now, a sixth myth about Jesus' birth that most Christians believe is that the wise men came at the very night that Jesus was born. Now, if you read Matthew chapter 2 verse 1, it says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. And you say, there you have it. Jesus was born, and immediately after that, the wise men came from the east. And so it really sounds like that. But there are actually 4 clues for us that this event described here actually took place 1 to 2 years after Jesus was born. Okay, so the first clue is that Matthew is known for jumping in time without informing his readers. And so when he says here, after Jesus was born, this might have been a year or two later. We see this, for example, at the end of Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, it says here, and he went and lived in a city called Nazareth. And then chapter 3, in those days, John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea. And later in the chapter, Jesus was baptized. And there Jesus was already 30 years old. So between Matthew 2 verse 23 and 3 verse 1, even with the words in those days, Matthew jumped 28 years. And so it's Matthew does this because Matthew is more arranged topically than Luke's gospel, which is very chronological. And Luke very much stipulates time for us. And so, yes, so it's very possible for Matthew to have jumped in time here. He does that. Also, we know that Luke chapter 2 verse 21 to 39, you can read that on your own, says that after Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, they went to Jerusalem to circumcise him when he was 8 days old, and from there they went back to Nazareth where they stayed. Okay, but in Matthew chapter 2 verse 14, let me read that to you. Matthew 2 verse 14, it says, and he rose, that's Joseph, rose, and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. And that took place like 4 BC, about 2 years after Jesus was born, right? And so immediately after the wise men came, Joseph took the baby because of God's warning and the angel's announcement, took the baby and fled to Egypt away from Herod, whose troops came from Jerusalem. So he wouldn't have just first gone to Jerusalem and then to Nazareth and then back to Bethlehem and then to Egypt. No, they fled immediately from Bethlehem to Egypt. And so all the events described in Luke 2 verse 21 to 39 had to take place before this account in Matthew chapter 2, which might have been a year or what, because so they first had to go to Jerusalem, circumcise him, go to Nazareth, stay there, come back to Bethlehem, and then these events would have taken place. Now, a question that maybe that you might have is, why would they come back to Bethlehem then a second time? Well, remember, first of all, Joseph had family. Most probably he had family and friends in Bethlehem to visit. But also Jerusalem was just like 7 kilometers away from Jerusalem. And God told the Jews to every year go to Jerusalem to worship him with the feasts, right? And so it was common practice for all the Jews to come to Jerusalem once or twice or 3 times a year to worship God. And then where would he stay? Well, he would stay probably with family just 7 kilometers away from Jerusalem. And so it's very, it's logical for him to be in Bethlehem again and again, every year, in fact. A third clue that we know that there was a time gap between Jesus' birth and this event in Matthew chapter 2 is that there was time necessary for the wise men to travel from the east, which most probably refers to Babylon, to Jerusalem and then to Bethlehem, right? And this was a journey of about 1,550 kilometers on animal, which would have taken at least 60 to 90 days if traveled consistently. There would have also been a considerable amount of preparation needed to make a journey for this long and for these important people with gifts, and probably a lot of them, right? And so time was needed for that journey to take place and the preparation for it. And then a fourth and final clue that this event in Matthew chapter 2 took about 1 or 2 to 2 years after Jesus' birth is that this would make sense for why Herod ordered for all the baby boys of 2 years old and under to be killed. Okay, and look at this verse 16, Matthew 2 verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were 2 years old or under, listen to this, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. So Herod didn't just say, okay, the baby boy is just born, so all the boys under 2. No, he he ascertained a specific time from the wise men, and because of that time that he ascertained, he said, okay, 2 years and under. So there was a reason why he chose 2 years. Now, we also find that earlier in the chapter, Herod spoke to the wise men when he ordered them. Herod summoned, verse 7, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. So Herod asked the wise men, when did you see the star? And they said, we saw the star 1 or 2 years ago. Okay, maybe they would give a more specific time, like 2 years ago. And then later, Herod said, okay, now according to that, you saw that star 2 years ago. That means the baby boy must be about 1 or 2 years old. Let's kill all the baby boys 2 years and under. So most probably this event took place, where the wise men came, took place 1 to 2 years after Jesus was born. Okay, so that was the sixth myth about Jesus' birth that most Christians believe. A seventh myth, and I really hope this is valuable. If it is, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. Seventh myth, they were the wise men. Just the word wise men. That's a myth, because they weren't wise men. Okay, they were men, but biblically, if you compare it to the book of Proverbs that tells us what is biblical wisdom, these people weren't biblically wise. In fact, that's why I believe the New American Standard Bible translates this as the Magi, because wise men, it's a myth. It's not true. It's inaccurate. So they translate it as Magi, which comes from the Greek word magus, which is also not very helpful. Magi, what does that mean? But I think it's at least not inaccurate. Who were the Magi? What was their role? Well, the Magi played prominent political and religious roles, not the biblical gods, that religion, but the Persian and the Babylonian gods. They worshipped them and they played this religious role there. Their so-called wisdom came from combining astronomical observations with astrological speculations, as the New American Commentary puts it. They were esteemed by their own people and were influential and wealthy. Okay, and they were the same people that we meet in Daniel chapter 1 verse 20, 2 verse 2, 4 verse 7, 5 verse 7, where the Babylonian king would each time, when he got a dream, first call his own magicians to explain these dreams to him, and when they failed, they would call Daniel, and he would be found 10 times wiser, right? The magicians, the same word, magos, is used in the Babylonian court. So the same people. And so, although they were very well respected in the Mesopotamia and the Greco-Roman Empire, the Jews and the Christians kept their distance from them. Okay, they were more like sorcerers. Okay, and we know they came from the east. The word in the Bible actually says the wise men came from the east, and most probably that was Babylon and Persia, where these people held this office. Now, an eighth myth about Jesus is we don't know if the wise men ever met Joseph. We normally tell the story with Jesus and Joseph and Mary and the shepherds and the wise men were all there, but we don't even know if that's true, if the wise men ever saw Joseph, because if we go again to Matthew chapter 2, where we get the account of the wise men, it says in verse 11, it says, the wise men going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. And so we don't even know if Joseph was there. Most probably he was just opening the door, maybe just nearby, but we don't know if that's there. So that's a small one, but just another one. We want to be accurate, so that's just a small one. A ninth myth about Jesus' birth account that we sometimes tell wrong, most Christians do, is that the wise men probably never met the shepherds as well, right? Because they came about 2 years later after the shepherds. The shepherds came on the night that Jesus was born, but the wise men came about 2 years later. And so we shouldn't see that as happening on the same night. And then the last one, a 10th myth about Jesus' birth, is that maybe or probably, or we don't know, if the wise men actually saw a real star. Okay, remember in the biblical time, stars and comets and asteroids and planets, they were all just described as a star. Okay, there were no distinction between them. Any white dot in the sky was described as a star. For example, Revelation 6 verse 13. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. So that refers to Revelation long after this, but just note that stars fell to the sky, and that most probably refers to asteroids, right, falling to the ground. Imagine if a star falling. We know that the sun is, any star is much bigger than the earth. A star cannot fall on the ground. So these refers to asteroids, because any white dot in the sky was seen as a star. And so when they say they saw a star, it might have been a real star, but it might have just been one of these other things. And so there are actually 4 views for us, and we do not know exactly what that was, but here are just 4 views that Christians believe and commentaries believe that possibly was there, but I think most of them really holds us with a loose grip, saying we don't really know. The first one view says that it was just a planetary conjunction. Historically, Jupiter and Saturn came very near to each other in around 7 BC, around the time that Christ was born, causing a brighter white dot in the sky than normal. And Jupiter was known as the royal planet, and Saturn was thought to be the planet representing the wasteland, which included Palestine. And this might have indicated to the Magi, these wise men, that a king was born in the wasteland. Maybe that's that. Or another view is that it was a nova, which was a sudden brightening of a star, or a supernova, the explosion of a star, which even brighter, right? Which caught this bright light for a while. Chinese astronomers recorded a nova, which was visible for 70 days in about 5 to 4 BC, which fell a date shortly before the death of Herod, right? The third view is a comet, although the only comet that we really know of is a Halley's comet, and that passed Earth too early in about 12 BC, so most probably not that. And then fourthly, probably the most common view, and it's a very much a possibility, is that it could have just been a supernatural creation of a star. God could have just flicked his fingers and there was a big bright star, and then later he just took it away. That's also a possibility. We are not denying the miraculous. We as Christians do believe that God can do the miraculous. Just in conclusion, what was the significance of this Bethlehem star? Well, the idea of a star heralding the birth of famous people and other significant events was widespread in the ancient Near Eastern world. A new star in the sky was often believed to herald the birth of a significant person in the land over which the star was shining. And thus God announced the birth and place of the new king in a language that these magi astronomers would understand. And so that's how God chose to announce this birth. I trust you now have a greater understanding of the Christmas story, and that it's more accurate. And the next time that you're going to share the gospel with someone and the birth of Jesus, that it will just be a little bit more accurate, because I really think we as Christians risk that we share the birth of Christ with all these great theological truths, but we mix with it some inaccuracies because of what we've been taught, and that others then hear this birth account and then they go check historically and biblically and they say, well, that's not true, and then they don't know what to actually really to believe, and that these great theological truths then gets frowned upon as just a fable. So if you were encouraged by this and helped, please share this with others so that they too may grow in their understanding of the true Christmas story, so that the truths about Christmas can be kept and passed on to the next generation.